we can see someone and we can think that we understand where they're coming from, and we have no idea where they're coming from.
Mike Davis on the podcast. What is up, Mike? How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the invite, man.
Yeah, man. I mean, we just had that conversation at our church we go to, and I'm like, man, you should start your own podcast. But before you do that, I want to get you on this one right here.
Yeah.
I want to hear what you have to say. And we do have some topics of discussion, but before we get into that, I wanted to kind of open it up to you and kind of introduce yourself to the people listening and like talk about like what it is you do in your life a little bit.
Well, my name is Michael Davis II. I designed. I'm a thought, someone who thinks a lot, and I like to challenge conventional wisdom, both in and outside the four walls of the church.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a father, proud father, and design. I think I might mention that. And that's what I do, man.
That's awesome, bro. Well, let's get right into it. First topic of discussion that you kind of brought to the table was this idea of artists and Christian artists specifically. Kind of talk about what you do as a Christian artist and how it glorifies God and how we actually bring this idea of art to the world from a Christian perspective.
Okay. Well, for those, there is that debate of Christian artists versus art that comes from someone that's Christian, right? And I tend to side with the latter because I was designing before I realized my calling back to God. And when I look back from a biblical standpoint, I look back in Exodus 35. You'll see that two guys there, Bezalel and Aholiab, I believe his name is pronounced in Exodus 35, verse 30. These two guys were the first guys in the Old Testament before the Holy Spirit descended in the New Testament. They were the first guys filled with the Spirit of God. And they were the artisans that essentially crafted the temple, which Moses would use to worship God.
Yeah.
And when I look at how these guys, they knew how to get things done. They were very excellent and skilled at what they did. And on top of that, they were teachers to the next generation on how to do these things.
Right.
So when I look at that in my own personal life, I say, hey, those are things that I've wanted to do since I came back to God. And when I first came back to God, one of the first things that I noticed was like there's this divide where secular or Christian, whatever it may be, Christian artist, Christian this versus someone who is, just a Christian who does that, right?
Yeah.
And so I'll start with that part right there. But then from the art standpoint, I've always felt this need to be a bridge to the world. And I remember there was a guy, he used to be down with Reach. He was actually one of the 4 members of Reach Records.
Okay.
Sho Baraka.
Yeah.
Meet Sho Baraka.
Yeah.
And I met him through one of the homies, Ruslan. And when I met him, I remember sharing with him. At the time, I had already done custom designs. When I was in the military, I started doing custom designs for myself and other friends. And when I got out, my then wife, who's no longer here, she encouraged me to do designs for people who inspired me on the celebrity side. And doors just kept opening for me. Whether it was Common, Kanye West, Usher, Nick Cannon. At the time, this is 2007. And I remember maybe 3 years later, I went through this period of being so, I was egotistical in that moment.
Yeah.
The more and more I would share those stories, the less God was involved, right? And then I went through this part where I didn't design, and I was really, really humble, to say the least.
Right.
But upon coming out of that season of going back to design, I happened to meet Sho Baraka, and I was showing him a pair of shoes that I had designed for Reach Records. And I remember saying, I just want to do this exclusively for the church. And this is 2010. And he said, no, this isn't for the church. This is for the world. Like, the church is not going to understand this and appreciate this. And fast forward now, I see what he was saying, because some of the things that I find myself doing, I see the things that I've actually watched him from afar go through those things. And separating himself and finding his own path outside of Reach Records.
Yeah. Can you kind of real quick explain that part? The church isn't going to understand this. Kind of like, and to play off that, the church is going to understand this how the world would understand it.
I was explaining to my children. I have a 10-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. And I was explaining to them, at times we have these gifts from God. And in the church, we tend to glorify the pastor, the the worship leaders.
Yeah.
Right. People who have what we consider a prominent platform. Right?
Yeah.
But the reality is, and I don't know the actual numbers, when you factor in all of the believers all around the world, let's just say, let's be generous. Let's say 15, which I think that's very generous. I think it's more in the single digits, mid-single digits. Let's say 15% of the overall body of Christ works at a church.
Mm-hmm.
So that means 85% of everybody else works out in the world, right? And we're using our gift to be able to draw people to God.
Yeah.
Right? Whatever that gift may be. Right? And you can look and you can see Paul in the New Testament where he was a tent maker. He was bivocational, essentially. So essentially, the church won't understand it, meaning that if it looks different, if it's odd, they tend to want to write it off because it doesn't look traditional, right?
Yeah.
Even to the point you can look back at the contemporary music in which we kind of worship now in certain churches, right? Now, when it came out in the 60s and 70s through Calvary Chapel, that music was completely hippie music. It was like it was pushing against the grain,
controversial,
right? And I think back to and I was telling my kids, I said, at times when the church doesn't know how to embrace something, they'll push it out into the world, and you know what? The world will take it.
Yeah,
the world will use it up.
Yeah,
the world will essentially take these people's giftings and their art and don't care about don't care about them, and then spit them up and chew them out, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean in that regard.
Yeah. Kind of like on that topic, where the world will take it, the world will use it. Something that's been brought up in some of the videos that you talk about Ruslan, some of the videos that Ruslan's been talking about, that's been a kind of hot topic of discussion, is this song called "Coming in Hot" by Andy Mineo. Have you heard that one?
Yes.
Yeah, and it seems like the world has taken that more than the church has taken that. It came out like 2 years ago, but recently you got, people on like TikTok using it, and it's like I'm trying to use the right words, but girls dancing inappropriately to this Christian
at the strip club, right?
It got played at the strip club, yeah. And then even most recently in news, Kim Kardashian used it in one of her videos.
Yeah.
So people were like freaking out. Andy Mineo was like posting it, like Kim Kardashian used my video and all this stuff. Talk about like how, because there's a lot of people in the Christian community, Christian hip hop community that follows them and has been following Andy for a while, and they're kind of they feel weird about it. How do you feel about that sort of stuff?
I love that stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's essentially, I love it for this reason. You're getting your message across to a wider audience. And some people will say, well, isn't that divisive? Or what if God is using that to spark something?
Right.
Who's to say how God is using what he's going to use? Right?
No doubt.
And so I think it's beautiful. I think it's great. And I think about it this way, because when the people that I've actually given designs to through the course of my years, the majority of them are on they're on the secular side, right? Yeah. These are hip hop artists who inspire me in their music, that in and of itself, it's a culture. We just left the barbershop where my son's getting a haircut, and I'm listening to like a lot of the music that's being played there, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, these aren't things that I listen to anymore, but these are things that I can go back and I have a certain grace for it. It doesn't bother me. But I'm sitting there, I'm looking at the subculture of the barbershop. I don't have to go to the barbershop because I have a bald head, but my son has to go, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, this is a missionary field right now, right? It doesn't look, this music is a connector for me to be able to, build a bridge with this person. But to get back to what you were saying, is that I think it's beautiful that could be used. And I think at times people get in their feelings about, and get dogmatic about certain approaches and then there's a part where it's like, well, where is there a clear rule defined as to what is this or what is this? I mean, if it's a clear moral issue of sin, then that is, that the Bible speaks on that.
Yeah.
But if it's not, then it's gray area. It doesn't have to be this or that. It could be and or both at the same time.
Right.
That makes any sense.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. That's cool. Kind of transition from that, another topic where it's totally on the other side, where Christians have an opinion on art where it is not Christian at all, actually almost satanic, I guess you could call it, was the Lil Nas X stuff that's been going on. You actually brought this to me. I'm like, oh, I'm glad he has an opinion on this, because I want to hear it. Because that's been hot. Christians are hot and bothered over this Lil Nas X shoe. I'm honest, like, if you listen to my opinion, I'm like I think it's whack, but I'm trying not to give it as much attention as,
The shoe? Do you think the shoe's whack? Or you mean
I haven't
top?
No, the whole idea that, and the whole music video. I haven't watched it. I've only seen like the clips on like TikTok, but I'm just seeing that. I'm like, just makes me shake my head. But I'm not like up and bothered and like starting a whole rant on it. But I'd love to hear your opinion on it, because you said you might have like a different opinion than most Christians.
Well, coming out of my specialty is footwear design. Since I was 15 years old, all I wanted to do was design footwear. That was it. I thought I was gonna be at the back. I knew I wasn't going to the NBA. I mean, at the time, I'm like 5'10", so I mean, I'm not Iverson. I'm not Isaiah Thomas, the little guys who can actually, I mean, the old Isaiah Thomas from the Pistons. Like I can't, do it like that level. So I think if I could design, it would keep me around the sport. And so my background has been in footwear design, right? And so for me, it's another culture that I'm a part of, right? I mean, it's another subculture that I reside in. It's my space. Yeah. So the morning that happened, actually the day after it happened, I remember a friend reached out to me, believer. I think we're a generation. I think they're probably like in their late 40s, early 50s, and they were like, "Hey, did you see this?" And they were like just going off about it. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, let me look into it, right? And I looked into it and I said, oh wow. I honestly said, you know what? We know what the word of God says. Let's park it right there. We know what God's word says. Okay. Yeah. Let's bring it back down to the world stuff. I say, you know what? This is genius. This is genius because when you think about someone losing, so there's a term, and I don't know the actual term, but you can lose your brand identity, right? So you think about, I don't know how it is now. We really don't like have to copy anything, but I remember learning this in business school where to Xerox something became a generic term, right? Right. But Xerox is started out as a printer, but it's like, hey, I'm about to go to FedEx Kinko's and Xerox something. It's like, no, that's not Xerox, that's FedEx Kinko's. But it loses a generic term. And I saw how essentially this branding and promotion was planned out in advance. And I'm thinking to myself, like, wait a minute, the day before, March 26th, was Nike Air Max Day. So every year annually, they put out the OG Air Max, and then they have these different collaborations, right? I think to myself, like, oh, wait a minute, this is the day after. So whoever's doing this is piggybacking off of that, because to the average consumer, they're like, oh, this is part of the Air Max collaboration, right? Like, even though it's not. Right. And then everything lined up where it's like, wait a minute, now we're going into the Holy Week. We're going into Passover. Right. And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, like this couldn't have been planned any better. And someone out there would say, oh, it's the devil doing this. Like, okay, let's park it right there for a second, guys. All right. I'm just thinking about just how it all planned out. I mean, how it all played out. And I think to myself, like, you know what? I don't agree with, it, but it's genius. But then the more I thought about it, I started thinking about some of the hurt that Lil Nas has gone through. I think at times we can see someone and we can think that we understand where they're coming from, and we have no idea where they're coming from. Right. And one of the tweets that I remember seeing was Lil Nas said, actually I think I have it here too, and I want to quote him on this. Yeah. He said, and this is from March, this is later on that day, he says, I spent my entire teenage years hating myself because of the blank y'all preached would happen because I was gay. So I hope you're mad. Stay mad. Feel the same anger you teach us to have toward ourselves. Wow. Now, I don't know the backstory behind that. I don't know who he's dealt with in his lifetime. But personally, and this is, when we walk in something, it's like you can have empathy and sympathy. You can get some things where I look and I say, you know what? My father I'm the byproduct of a parent who was a part of the Pride lifestyle. That's what I call the LGBTQ community. And I've seen, for a period of time when I wasn't walking God, I've met a lot of people who are part of that lifestyle. And do I co-sign lifestyle? No, I'm not saying I co-sign lifestyle, but what has led people to even go down that path? Right. I've met a lot of people. For my father, I didn't find this out until after my father passed away in 2010. My father was molested by his stepfather, who was a Christian. Yeah. So just imagine how that will warp someone's sense of like, wow, why would I want to serve a God that has allowed that to happen? Right. Or who knows how that shaped my dad's perspective of like what love is for someone. Now for me, having been in the military, having served on submarines, the more intel you have about something, the better you can then fulfill the mission, right? So when I look at Lil Nas X, I'm like, oh wow, I'm seeing a bunch of hurt. And for me, that would have changed the way that I evangelized to my father. That would have changed things drastically, right, kind of thing, right? So when I see Lil Nas X, this is him lashing out in his own way for whatever the reasons are, that which we don't know, and it's but when I see it, I think about the hurt, but then I also think about, wow, this is dope how he did this, how can we as believers do this?
Yeah.
What happened? Where's the disconnect? Because I think about two of my favorite characters in the Word are Daniel and Joseph.
Mm.
And these are guys who studied underneath their culture of the day.
Right.
Daniel served in Babylon under three kings. Joseph served under Pharaoh. These are men who didn't compromise, yet they had favor, and they were put in charge of so much. When you look at Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these guys, it wasn't just they got an internship. These guys studied for years. Yeah. It means they studied the culture for years before they then went and ingratiated them. They humbled themselves enough to say, instead of saying, I'm a Christian, I'm not doing this. All right, I'm a Christian, or I believe in God. Because Christian, the term Christ wasn't there. All right, I believe in God. I believe in Yahweh. I'm about to go and get this internship over here, serving in the world, keeping myself holy, but I want to make real change. So how does that happen? And through fasting, through prayer, through consecrating themselves, however they may look for them, it says that they had 10 times the wisdom as their counterparts.
Yeah,
I think to myself, like, that was an old covenant. We have a new covenant,
right? So
why don't we have 100 times the wisdom? I mean, just personally, that's something that I think about. It's something that I wrestle with. And it's one of the things that keeps me grounded when I get challenged with these different questions about should you or should you not, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking to myself, I'm looking at Lil Nas X and say, man, all right, let me look back at myself. The plank in our own eye. It's like, how can we do stuff like this? Like, how can we not necessarily put out Satan's shoes? That's not what I'm saying, but how can we like be geniuses and on
the
this
whole
level?
Strategy behind what he did.
Bam. Yes. Yeah. So that's the way my mind works. It's like, I'm not even, and it's weird because I remember like the following day I went to my mom's house. Like 4 days later, I went to my mom's house. And my mom was like, you heard about Lil Nas X? I'm like, Mom, 4 days ago, you didn't even know who this dude was. Like, now you see it on the news, and you'll be like, I'm like, all right, let's slow down for a second, people. Let's slow down for a second. And then the day before that, the friend that initially reached out to me about the whole thing, I was explaining this to them, and they were on their soapbox, and I respect their opinion. The day before, like 3 days later, they reached out to me and said, oh, because then it turned out that it wasn't a collaboration with Nike, which it's not a collaboration with Nike.
Right, find that out now.
I was telling my friend, I'm like, I've gone to school. This isn't just because I slap my name on something doesn't mean it's a collaboration. I've done custom shoes. I can't go out there and say this is a Extraordinary Steps times Nike collaboration that I'm giving to whoever it may be.
Right.
I can get sued for that, right? Kind of thing, right? So that person was like, oh yeah, Nike's suing them, and I'm like, yeah, let's just slow down for a second. One thing I can say is I've learned that through the years through Pastor Bayless to remain even keeled, to not be too high, not to be too low, and don't swing too far in either way, but just stay where you're at, just park it where you're at. Just at times sit back and let it come to the surface, kind of thing. You don't always have to just jump in and say what you're gonna say, because more things will come out as you take a step back from it.
Next kind of topic of discussion I wanted to get into with you was coming out of 2020. Now we're in 2021, still experiencing a lot of the side effects of what I call COVID season, kind of. Can you talk about that, like what you guys went through as a family, what America went through as a whole, and like what the pandemic really showed everyone?
Oh, wow. Okay. It's, what the pandemic showed me were to stick to the convictions that I have, that I know that are true. And when it comes to salvation is one thing, but then there are these gray areas that we struggle with and we wrestle with in our faith. Right? And should I do this? Should I not do this? I'm leaning, and when I say that, right before the pandemic even hit, I remember, because we met serving through young adults at Cottonwood. And I remember kind of feeling like, maybe my season in Cottonwood is up in young adults, right? And I've served there for 4 years. A lot of the community has, walked with me in, the passing of my wife. And there's this part of me that you feel this, maybe not obligation, but it's like this sense of duty to want to still be there, right? Maybe even past the season that you're supposed to be there.
Right.
And I remember in January, I remember going to Pastor Sam, and I remember saying, you know what, Sam, I don't necessarily know what this is. Actually, I don't even know what the next steps are. But I feel like my season may be up here, right? Yeah. And he was like, hey, all right, well, let's sit with that for a little bit and let's see how you feel about it. I'm like, all right, cool, man. And in February, the Thursday, it was a Thursday, he called me. He said, Mike, it's been about a month since you brought this to me, because I know you've been wrestling with this for months before you even brought it to me. It's been about a month since we actually discussed it. How are you still feeling? And I said, bro, like I'm still feeling the same way. Yeah. I don't know what this is, because I don't have next steps just yet, bro. But I feel like I'm supposed to, take a step away, or at least from the duties that I would do as a young adult leader. And he said, okay, man, well, I'm here for you. He's someone that is an accountability partner to me, and has been there. And the following Friday, because we normally meet on Fridays, right?
Yeah.
That was the first Friday where California got shut down.
Okay, yeah.
And so CYA is not meeting, and then this is the first weekend our church isn't meeting.
Right.
And there's this part of me, it's like, oh man, like, okay, did I hear right? Did I hear wrong? Like, what do you need me to do?
Right.
I gotta, how does the church need me? And it's like, they don't need you. It's gonna go on with or without you, Mike. Can you step back and prepare for what you're supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah.
Think about Paul, and if you go and read in Galatians 1, 15 or 17, we see Paul for all these great things that he's done, right? Writing the majority of the New Testament, almost the majority of the New Testament. But we skim over, I think in verse 15, it talks about him being in Arabia for 3.5 years. And what did that look like? Because being in Arabia for 3 years, he missed a lot of the happenings of the early formation of church in Jerusalem, right? He missed what that was looking like. And right now, it's like, okay, church right now is being redefined.
Right.
What is
Big time.
How can I be a part of it? It's like,
yeah,
fall back. It's going forth without you, right? So I had to struggle through that personally of like, I got to get back out there.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you got 2 kids. They're not in school. Your primary role for them is to, be, ministry starts at home.
Yes.
Their mother isn't here anymore, unfortunately. She passed away from breast cancer at 37 years old. And so you're now as a not a single father. I'm the only parent because, it wasn't by choice. You got to make sure that they're okay.
Yeah.
Because if they're not okay, then it makes no difference what you're giving to the world. I mean, Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians about love.
Yeah.
I'm not loving my kids by serving them and putting aside what I want in this season, then what good is it that if I'm serving at CYA or wherever I'm serving on the prayer team, wherever I'm serving at, right, kind of thing. But COVID taught me a lot about just the convictions that you have, because at times we could even look to our leaders for the cosign of, should I be doing this?
Yeah.
Meaning that once we've prayed about it, once we've gone to the word about it, we do, because there is wisdom in counsel. Right? So when we're going to our leadership and we're saying, hey, how do I take these next steps? At times we're looking for them to give us language to things that even they haven't done. Right? They now granted they've conquered an aspect of faith in their own way, and there may be certain things that are similar in their life that we can implement, right? But by and large, it looks different. And I remember it really came to a head through COVID of just trusting God in June after the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, with the host of other people through the years, other black figures through the years, people through the years. I remember kind of questioning, like, what, I'm just going to focus on being a dad. I don't care about design right now because it feels like I'm kind of spinning my wheels. So how is it going to look? And I'm good. I'll just focus on being a dad. And in June, we did a panel on race.
Yeah.
And I was asked to share my insight on that because I had an incident happen with me with San Diego PD, and I was beat up when I was in the military. They knew it. So Sam thought my opinion or my insight would be valuable to the conversation. So I spoke on that. And then within the 48-hour period, a jacket that I had designed back in 2017, it was featured on the BET Awards, the opening of the BET Awards by an artist by the name of Rhapsody. And she was actually the first. The jacket itself, honestly, it was initially designed as a woman's piece, but because it's a unisex garment, and I've met a lot of people on the music side who speak on social justice issues, it took on a life of its own. Right? And so I'm sitting there with my kids 40 hours after doing the panel, or after the panel aired, and I had 4 different people reach out to me who were like, man, like, and one of them is the nephew of if I mentioned the artist's name, you guys would know the artist. Yeah. He reached out to me because he has a jacket, and he's like, man, like, are you watching BET Awards? I'm like, I'm hanging out with my kids right now. They're like, yo, your jacket's on the awards. Like, it was the opening scene to what was going on. Yeah. And it was for the 30th anniversary of Public Enemy's "Do the Right Thing" song. So they remixed it with a lot of new artists, right? Nas, Rhapsody, YG, and Black Thought from the Roots. And again, this isn't necessarily a cosign of what they're saying. I'm just saying how art that was created from someone who's a Christian, is being seen on a global scale.
Yeah.
Right. So in that moment, what I realized was, like, I said, man, you know what? Like, a friend of mine tells me often, he says, Mike, you're going to have to do what you're going to do in the world without a major cosign. You're going to have to be like J. Cole. You're going to have to go platinum without a feature, bro. Like, you know it's in you. Like, we know it's in you. God has his hand on you. God has his hand, we know this, right?
Yeah.
And in that moment, I remember that weekend as I processed this, I remember going to Pastor Bayless. And it was after a service, and I pulled him to the side. I said, PB, because for the longest I struggled with, should I be a youth pastor? Should I be a young adult pastor?
Yeah.
Or should I design? And it's like, you can do both, right? Or why do you have to give yourself the label of a pastor? Like, you're doing that with what you're doing, right? And so I remember pulling Pastor Bayless aside, and I said, PB, with all due respect, sir, I love you. I've been at this church for 13 years. I want this to come out in the right way, because I don't want this to sound weird, but I was like, you're my pastor, and I sit under you. But I've learned everything that I can learn from you in regards to being released. Doesn't mean that I know everything that I need to know from you as far as the word is. That's completely separate. But the equipping, you've done everything that you can do for me to release me into the space that I'm supposed to go in. And when I said that, he looked at me, and he gave me a hug, and he had this big smile on his face. And it was almost like a father having, like a coming of age moment, right? And I had to struggle through that for years to actually get to that point of actually being able to say that to my senior pastor, because it feels like, oh, that feels sacrilegious. I shouldn't say that. It's like, well, wait a minute. Like, he had to step out on his own too and do what he was doing. Right. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the church that we have right now in that regard, right? So this pandemic really showed me the importance of the convictions that I have, and because there are times where, had I listened to the world, or had I listened to people in the church, you shouldn't meet this person. You should connect. It's like, if I don't go here, what I've realized too, and I think I've heard Ruslan say this, because he's done a lot of things on the music side, is that when we go into these places and spaces, it isn't people there worshiping the devil. They aren't playing. They're not chanting.
Right.
These are just people who, by and large, are either lost.
Yeah.
They have some. And they may be buried underneath some church hurt as well. Because some of the people that I've met, the musical people, like, they have a background of church. They come from a praying grandmother. So where was the disconnect there? Where the church essentially said, hey, we can't use that because it sounds different, and now the world is using it, and it's like, oh, I know several. When I think about To Pimp a Butterfly, I know several people responsible for the sound on that album. Yeah, who were the architects of that. These are people who I've gotten designs to. Right? And this isn't the point of like trying to name drop or anything. And I remember one time, one of the guys, I remember seeing him with a pair of shoes. He's in a photo, and he's wearing some shoes that I customized for him, right? The Nike Extraordinary Steps exclusive. Because I can't do that, right? I can't say it like that, right? But I remember I remember just texting him. I said, man, like, I was like, oh, I see you wearing the shoes. And he's like, yeah, man, these are my lucky shoes. He's like, I've worn them through the entire recording of this album. And I was like, whoa. So, and in the shoes, underneath the insole, when I sign it, there's actually scriptures in there. Yeah. And it's anointed with oil from Jerusalem. And it's that's like hard. It's dude. Like people don't realize, it's like I'm in those places and spaces where it's like, oh, had I been listening to my friend who reached out to me when the Lil Nas X thing happened, and she was like, you know, had I listened to that friend, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to plant a seed with which I can go back later on and speak to them. Right. So these are the convictions that I had to walk through and wrestle through and say, okay, I know that you've gifted me and wired me this way. And yes, it looks different than my predecessors. And essentially, what I've learned too is I'm becoming the thing that I want to see, because I never had an example full on. Like, we know if you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, a pastor, there's examples of how to get there. When you're a creative person, I mean, we're all creative. When you're an artsy creative, and you're going into a certain space, well, what does that actually look like? How does that actually look? So these are things that I've wrestled with extensively, but COVID taught me that I wasn't off. I think at times I was sharing a vision with people who couldn't buy what I was selling because it wasn't, they have to actually see it, as opposed to trying to share with them and them giving me the okay to do it kind of thing. So
I feel that. I feel like a lot of stuff has to do with on the topic of conviction, just trusting in God, trusting that you're hearing from God too, and what you're doing aligns with His Word. So with that, following your convictions, and we're slowly kind of coming out of the COVID season, restrictions are loosening. What do you feel like is next for you? Like, where do you feel like that whole last year set you up to where you are now to put you in a place to what you want to do next?
Last year allowed me to slow down, because the beautiful thing about technology and social media is that we see more than our predecessors have ever seen.
Right.
Think about how with COVID, think about, Spanish flu, 1918. How did people know what was going on? It was reported in the newspaper, and then it was word of mouth, right?
Right.
If things were off, they were getting, there were retractions, they were, updates, but those updates usually came, hours in between, because you have a morning paper, and let's say that they do an evening paper, and they have to do a retraction. So you were getting updates, let's say maybe twice. And this is just me. Like, I don't know the actual stats, so don't crucify me on this. But if I'm just guessing right now, guys. But it's like, okay, you have updates twice a day with these newspapers on how things used to be. Now we have our phones, so we're constantly bombarded with things.
Yeah.
Right? So you listen, especially when it's like, okay, when you're consuming media, it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm listening. This pastor over here is saying to do this. This popular pastor over here is saying to do this, and it's like, wait a minute, let's not have to get back to being even killed like Pastor Bayless. So wait a minute, this dude's been successful in pastoring longer than these other pastors have been alive.
Right. Yeah.
Let me slow down. Let me unplug. Then I started going back to that thing I was saying, okay, well, I was told to step back. So step back. And when I stepped back, I actually started putting things in perspective of like, okay, that makes sense in my life. Why did you give me to do this? Why did you allow certain things to happen for me, God? And because even when I think about me being in school, I went to fashion school because as I was studying to be a youth pastor, I was taking a class on faith at our church back when it was Cottonwood Leadership College.
Yeah.
I was taking a class on faith that required us to do something that required great faith. And then that was our final paper, was to write about that experience. For me, it was like, wait a minute, let me go to fashion. Let me put in for this fashion school, right? Got in for the fashion school, got a full ride, all these different things, and it's like, man, I'm supposed to be here. Maybe this isn't a trick from the devil to get me off my path.
Yeah.
Right? But I've actually had to go back through COVID and look at those moments and say, okay, and then as Pastor Bayless says, if it's in your wheelhouse to do, if you're not putting yourself, put yourself out there and sacrifice and work, but he's like, yo, you're not sacrificing your family in the process. You're not going into debt to get this thing that you're trying to get, right? Or, people could say that it's good debt. People who debate, education, whether it's good debt or not. But it's like, all right, this stuff is covered. And all I did was step out in faith. So I've actually had to go back over COVID and say, during this time, I'm just kind of reflecting and saying, oh, that's the preparation that I've been going through to launch into what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, even now, as we're talking right now, man, I've been told for years, what are you going to do with your voice, Mike?
Yeah.
Like, I used to when I was in the Navy on submarines, when the submarine was rising, I used to have to give these announcements of like the radar contacts that are around so we don't hit anything, right? I was one of like maybe 5 black guys on the submarine, because like I have like 120, 150 guys at a time, right?
Okay.
And so in my division, I was the only black guy in my division. And so I make these announcements. And I remember I used to get in trouble because they're like, why are you trying to sound all smooth and sick? I'm like, this is how I talk when I'm giving the announcement. I'm sorry that you guys don't sound like this. I'm not trying to be Barry White or what have you. This is just how I sound, right? So I think back to that. Then I think back to a decade ago hosting a Christian radio station, right? Hip hop station when I was at Long Beach City College. And I'm kind of looking at all these things at times. It's like, oh, you've been using your voice in so many different ways through the years. This is in your wheelhouse to do these next things that are in your heart to do, kind of thing. So coming out of COVID, it's shown me, one, the importance of family, my kids, because my wife isn't here anymore. Or, Nicole, we were not married. She's not here anymore.
Yeah.
But making sure that they see what's going on, because they can't be sacrificed. My kids can't be sacrificed on the altar of ambition. Right? I was watching a movie the other night with them called Imagine That, with Eddie Murphy and Yara Shahidi, who plays Zoe on Blackish. And at the time, she was about 6 or 7 years old. It's kind of like a father who's trying to find his way in corporate America. Like, he's really excellent at what he does, but he neglects her. as I'm watching this movie, that like that's a piece of art that speaks to me. I'm not necessarily in my word, growing in my word, but there are biblical principles in that movie that I
think you muted yourself. You're good. You're good.
There are biblical principles in that movie that I'm able to extract, and I'm like, oh, I can see where I can connect with that right now in my life. So my kids, them seeing what's going on, because this is a level of faith that is being lived out through their eyes as well, that they may not be able to communicate with me.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one of the biggest things during this time, man.
That's awesome, bro. Because I feel like the world keeps telling everyone to keep going, keep pushing, strive after your dreams. It's a whole different story when you got kids, though, man. You're raising these beautiful young kids to grow up to be, leaders in the church, and they can't do that if they don't have a leader in the household, which is your position, obviously. Yeah. And that's so big, bro. Yeah. I appreciate that. I really do, because we need more parents like you, man.
I think really back to one of my favorite. I leaned in a lot to one of my favorite voices, and thank you, by the way. One of my favorite communicators of all time is a guy by the name of Paul Scanlon, and he's the father of Charlotte Gamble, who pastors in the UK.
Right.
And I remember just like his perspective on church culture, because he pastored for 32 years, and he even admits, he says, when I look back on it, I was never a pastor. I think I just was a great communicator. And people just kind of threw me into this position of being a pastor. And having that mind frame actually kind of changed his, like, some of the things some of the off the wall things that how he looks at life.
Yeah.
Is I really, like, he gives language to a lot of things that I understand, I get, right?
Yeah.
And even to the point of like Charlotte Gamble, I remember when she came a few years ago when Cole was here, like, because she was actually one of Cole's favorite speakers. But I remember she was saying that the church should be a place where, for those who are sick and hurting, they get help. For those of us who have grown up and need to be out in the world, we should be so on fire with our own personal walk with God that we're just coming to church to get a fill up so that we can go back to the world and like, yo, I gotta get outside these four walls to help them. So as you mentioned, I tell my kids a lot, hey, your place may not be within the four walls of the church. I mean, you can serve in other capacities, because there are different ways of culture within the church. I mean, you have house churches, you have people who do missionary work. They're no less significant than how we do church. And even in America, on the West Coast, we're considered different than those in the Bible Belt, those in the South, or those in the Northeast. How we perceive and how we do things. So that's one of the things that I try to, because these are things that my father didn't do for me. So I'm trying to show my kids that, hell, these artistic abilities that you guys have are from God. So how can we sharpen them so that you guys can go out into the world and just start winning souls the way that you're called to do it?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
That is dope. To kind of transition into the next and final topic, but still on the topic of COVID, just a different kind of perspective of looking at it. The idea of grief, and this is something that you brought to me as well. What do you think, like, how should we handle the grief that COVID brought, whether through death, sickness, a lot of people even going through a lot of mental things that affected, families, whether it's divorce, breakups, all that kind of stuff. How should we deal with grief?
Grief comes in a lot of ways. When I think about it, I've dealt with grief personally. I mean, Nicole transitioned in 2016. She had a 16-month battle with breast cancer, right? But before that, I remember talking to a friend like the first couple of months of COVID, and I said, man, how do you feel? I said, I feel normal. How do you feel? He's like, I feel normal. And I'm talking to a friend who also served on submarines. And essentially what we were realizing was like, yo, COVID feels like being on a submarine, except we can go outside.
Yeah.
Personally, like, that's how we felt. Because we're used to, and we're trained to compartmentalize. And you gotta compartmentalize to go do the mission that you gotta do to get, back home, kind of thing, right? So I started seeing through those lenses of like, oh wow, everybody in some regard, we all experience grief in many different ways.
Yeah.
But by and large, as a whole, we're all grieving so many different losses, right? Loss of life, loss of routine, perhaps even loss of dreams.
Yeah.
So many different things that we're grieving in that regard. And I just thought to myself, okay, is this a passing moment? Like will grief actually have a way of being at the forefront of a lot of conversations going forward? Because this is something that we deal with, or do we just kind of just sweep underneath the carpet? Like, okay, I dealt with that, and just kind of sweep under the carpet.
Right.
And personally, I've lost, yesterday marked the 1 year anniversary of my godmother, who she was 78. She passed away from COVID last year. And I remember 2 months before that, we were talking, and she said, you know, are you doing what you know you should be doing? And she's someone I grew up in church from the time I was born to the time I was 12. From 12 to 26, I was off in the world. During that time, I was serving in the military. After I got the military, I came back to Christ 4 months later, and that's how I ended up in Cottonwood in 2007. And so I knew what she was saying, because there's this thing of like, oh, are you preaching at your church, kind of a thing? Because you know, and it's like, you know, you got that call in your life, baby, right? And it's like, no, well, I'm doing what I'm doing in my own unique way, right?
Right.
So I thought back to those conversations, but I think about grief, and like grief is something that's very, very big to me, having gone through the process with Cole, seeing so many other people go through the process now. Do we acknowledge grief in the various levels of it? And that's one of the things that really has impacted my life. And I think about that for other people, because at times you could be grieving and you don't know why you're grieving. I was talking with a friend. We went to Texas toward the end of last year, and some friends of mine who helped to plant a church in San Francisco, they moved back to Dallas. So we were able to connect with them when we were there. As we were there, the wife was sharing with us, it's a married couple. She said, you know, I miss San Francisco. I miss certain things about the Bay. I miss what we were doing for God. And she was actually grieving. And she, as we were talking, and I was sharing some things with her, she was like, I didn't realize that was grief. I'm like, yeah, that's, you know, it's a different form of grief, but it's grief nonetheless. But it's important that you acknowledge that's what it is. So post-COVID, we are still dealing with grief.
Right.
We're still going to be dealing with grief. I mean, it's life and death are inevitable, right? That's everything that we do is a life and death moment. When I say that, whether it's physical life and death, or whether it's a dream that dies, whether it's a career that's over, where things are in life and death, and not to sound morbid, right, kind of thing, but that's what it is. And how do we process these things in grief? Because if we don't process it in a healthy way, it's going to come out somewhere else in life.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are scared to process it. They're scared to maybe even acknowledge or recognize that they have grief in their life. And it seems like especially true for men, where we don't want to seem weak, I guess you could call it. But talk a little bit about how we should process that. How do we process that? What are some ways we can process that?
I'm very fortunate to have had a mother that I had growing up as a single kid. My mother encouraged me to cry. She encouraged me to express my feelings. And having grown up, I grew up in South Central LA. And from there, you know, you grow up around this bravado of be a man, toughen up.
Yeah.
Right. The hip hop I listened to, the hip hop and or rap that I listened to back then too, didn't do much to cultivate sharing your feelings. So we got
guys hear that, like, sharing your feelings. Ew. You know
it's like you gotta be able to be. It comes to the part of maturity where you can just peel back those layers and say, okay, do I want to get better? Do I want the best for myself and for me and for those that I'm in relationship as I go forward? So you ask for me, I would say, how important is it, right, to your own healing and your own growth and your development? I mean, you can try to squelch it in some regard, but it's going to come out later on down the line. Right? It may be completely destructive, not necessarily, right? But it will come out some way down the line. So I would just encourage people, men in this regard, to also too, you got to realize, okay, well, the thing that was thrust upon them, where did that come from? Who told them that it wasn't okay? Because sometimes we can have these voices in our head from people who we love, parents, close friends, spouses, girlfriends, right, partners, and we're trying to appease them, or it's been something. So we got to be able to say, where is this coming from? Let me look at that person's life too. Like, did they have the best mental aspect when it came to this? When I look back on their track history, right? I mean, I think at times we can be scared of getting an answer because, well, we don't want to ask the right question because we know the answer that we're going to get.
Oh,
so it's like, ask that question, right?
Yeah.
But then be willing to sit with it, and then be willing to do the work, however that may look. Do the work, because it will help you in the long run. if you can stick with it, be patient to do it.
Yeah, that is awesome, Mike. I think that's a good place to end it right there. That is awesome. Mike Davis, everyone, thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for taking time out of your day. You got your kids here with you. Bring on the camera real quick for the people that are watching on YouTube. You guys want to be on the YouTube real quick? Yeah, come through. Just say what's up. Right here.
Right here. The camera's right here. You can wave.
Yeah. We have Mike's kids. Introduce yourself a little really quick. Micah. And Legend. Well, I appreciate you coming, bringing your family along, watching the show. I know a lot of people get a lot out of this. You are a man that exudes wisdom, and that's a big reason why I wanted you on this podcast, because I think your words carry a lot of weight, even to people that just maybe are listening to you for the first time. I think they'll get a lot out of what you have to say. So appreciate you being on here. Are you on Instagram or Twitter?
I am on Instagram.
Drop your handle real quick. The people want to follow you.
It's Extraordinary Steps. It's EXO_steps. Right? And that's where I design under. I don't have anything posted right now. I pulled it in that season, just kind of being by myself. I pulled everything down.
Stepping back. Respect
right.
it. Awesome. Make sure you follow Mike. He's going to be posting when he's ready. And he's got a lot of dope stuff to post. I already know. But if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, drop a comment if you thought anything was interesting you wanted to talk about, or maybe something you disagreed with. If you're on any podcast streaming platform, make sure you hit that subscribe button as well. Mike, we usually end it with a fist bump. Boom. There it is. Appreciate you, man. Peace.